I'd like to say a little bit about myself, introduce myself to your audience, if that's okay.
Please.
My name is Stephen Eggert, and I grew up in Colorado and actually lived there until I was 24. But during that time when I was growing up, I just had this inner desire, this great inner quest to move to Los Angeles, California. And I think many have felt that calling over the years, here in our country at least. There's something that I didn't understand what the appeal was, but I just felt a deep sense of belonging there. And so finally, by the age of 24, I made the big move. I had planned it for several years and worked two jobs to earn enough money so that I could actually make that move. And the way it all occurred, I mean, really, it was kind of magical. I look back now and I think, wow, I really feel the hand of God in the way it came together for me, the people that He put in my life that made it possible for me to make the move. And because I did so with very little money, truly on faith, with a place to live for 2 weeks, and that was it. I had $800 in my pocket, no credit cards, no job. So I had been out there and visited the place several times, but it really was going on faith. And by God's grace, everything that needed to happen and fall into place did fall into place. I got a job by the end of the first week. I found a place to live by the end of the second week. And, scraped by until I got my first paycheck. And the rest is history. I just fell in love with living in Los Angeles, where I did live for 8 years prior to then being transferred with my job at that time to Northern California, where I then spent the bulk of my life living out about 35 miles outside of San Francisco. And so that when I look back though at my life, and now, by the way, now I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the last 3 years, I left California about 3 years ago, and moved literally about 500 miles downstream from the same river that I grew up on in Colorado. So I feel like I've, in a sense, come back to my roots, just further downstream. And Tulsa, Oklahoma, has been my new home for 3 years now. So when I look back at my life, I've always felt like I've been on a spiritual quest. I feel like I was very fortunate to have family who were very spiritually minded, and I grew up in a traditional Christian church, which was described as Pentecostal. So I'm really grateful that I had that grounding and those initial teachings in the Bible, and I was able to form my own personal relationship with Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And so that was a foundation, certainly, in my life. But additionally, I had a sense of, I had a lot of questions that were unanswered. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is living here on earth all about? How can I deepen my personal relationship with my Creator? And different questions like that. And fortunately, I had a mother who was an Aquarian. And I state her astrological sign because Aquarians are known for being free thinkers, for being explorers, for seeking truth. And she certainly embodied all of those qualities. And so she was a voracious reader and just read everything she could get her hands on that pertained to spiritual side of life. And so from a young age, I was exposed to a lot of teachings outside of the traditional biblical teachings from my church. And one of those, I remember at age 12, she had a book written by Edgar Casey, and it was called Edgar Casey on Atlantis. And I was just immediately engrossed in that book. Here I'm 12 years old, and I'm thinking, I just felt this inner awakening to the idea of Atlantis and what it meant. And in this book, Edgar Casey is doing what he called past life regressions. And he would take and interestingly, Edgar Casey, when I studied him, he was a Christian himself and developed these powers outside of his outside conscious understanding. He didn't see himself as a mystic or a psychic. He just wanted to help people with healing, actually. That was his initial entree into doing these past life regressions, because he found that he could gain answers to help people with medical issues in their life. And through doing it in conjunction with his wife, he found that he started reaching deeper and deeper and deeper into people's past life experiences in ways that were even unexplained and not understood by him in his conscious mind, but he would go into a deep sleep and a deep trance. And so this book had a series of lifetimes that people had revealed having lived on Atlantis, on the lost continent of Atlantis. And to me, I just was completely fascinated by this concept and immediately felt a connection to Atlantis and felt that also it sparked an interest in reincarnation for me, which of course was outside of my traditional Christian upbringing. But for me, once I pondered it, and this is at an early age, it for me made sense of life to because reincarnation uh, was a demonstration that God wanted my soul to evolve, not just in this lifetime, but from prior lifetimes and possibly in future lifetimes. I believe evolution does happen not only on a physical basis here on Earth, but on a spiritual basis for our souls. And and I've done a lot of studying since then on the topic of reincarnation. And I find that, of course, I think there are some perversions of the understanding of that teaching in many other religions, potentially, ancient Hindu religions, Buddhism, particularly, potentially. In terms of, I think the original teachers in those religions who introduced that concept were speaking directly to the evolution of our soul as a distinct evolution of God. God created us and God created our souls. And so our souls evolve through reincarnation. I don't believe that our souls ever embody as rocks or as animals or as any other aspect in nature. I really have a true belief and understanding that reincarnation explains the evolution of our souls on a spiritual path from physical embodiment to physical embodiment. And as I ended up learning more about the concept of reincarnation, I learned that there are a few references remaining in the Bible where reincarnation is referred to, and that was really helpful to understand and learn for me because I really look to biblical teachings as my foundation, and I try to tie things as I learn them in my life back to my biblical teachings, the teachings of Jesus Christ. And as we know, it says in the Bible, if the works and the things that Jesus said were to be written down in books, it says that the earth could not contain the volume of his teachings and his works. So we know that, I mean, just given that statement from the Bible, we know there was a vast amount of knowledge, a vast amount of things he said, a vast amount of things he did that were just not recorded, that are lost to history. And so it right there is the seed for what other teachings are now bringing to light. And so another thing that I really found fascinating when I came into teaching contact with the teachings of the Ascended Masters is the idea of progressive revelation. And it just makes sense to me. Why would God give us one messenger, one wonderful heavenly person, Jesus Christ, but give us one person throughout all of history and then leave us alone with no further people to elucidate us, to guide us, to teach us, to give us greater truths. And we do know in the Old Testament that there were other prophets who came before Jesus. We know of Moses, we know of Noah, we know Elijah, Elisha, we know of Prophet Samuel. There are many prophets that are talked about in the Old Testament. But after the New Testament, with Jesus' life and his resurrection, there is not much that we are aware of in terms of the last 2,000 years. So when I learned about progressive revelation and I started realizing, well, there have been saints and sages and prophets since Jesus' time. More recent time, we've had people like Padre Pio in the Catholic Church. We've had Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and people who just espouse the aspects of Jesus' love and his kindness and his compassion. And so we certainly, in my estimation, have prophets amongst us from time to time, sent to guide us, sent to raise our consciousness, sent to provide teachings that are relevant to our period of time in history, relevant to our civilization. And another thing that I just feel is so important in that understanding is when you go back to reincarnation is that God, and I've learned now since that God has the feminine and masculine aspect. We have a father, mother God. And so Alpha and Omega are the two aspects of God. So God does have the divine feminine and the divine father together manifesting in him. And so it occurred to me that God, as our parent, having created our souls, would not want us to suffer. I mean, what parent out there wants their children to suffer? What parent out there, if they have 10 children, would say, okay, this child is going to live their life only to the age of 5, and they're going to have cerebral palsy, and they're going to have this horrible life. Whereas this child, oh, they're going to have the best education, they're going to have the best advantages, they're going to have all the financial success and everything that they need in their life. How could you go through your 10 children, say, and pick and choose which ones we're going to have great lives and which ones we're going to have very difficult, challenging lives? And that doesn't to me sound like a very loving parent if that's in fact how things work. And so the concept of reincarnation completely explained to me why there are such seeming inequities in life, why some people are born into what great wealth, or born in with great wisdom, or born with great qualities, great skills, whereas others are not quite at that point, or have a much more challenging life, or have a much shorter life. So there are, many inequities that we can identify in life, and really it is the concept of reincarnation that makes sense of that for me. So I just feel like it opens the doors to further understanding of our spiritual quest and our spiritual advancement here on Earth. So that has been a big plus for me to have learned that. But I do say that I'm very grateful for that foundation of the church that I grew up in, because it really acquainted me with the teachings of the Bible, which are so profound. And there are so many great truths in the Bible. And it really is up to us to ponder those teachings and to look for the deeper truths and the deeper mysteries and the deeper teachings that do exist. And as I referenced when I started talking about reincarnation, there are a couple references that did succeed to the present day Bible. As we know, the books of the Bible were decided upon by a council called the Nicene Councils in about the third century after the life of Jesus. And so there were a group of scholars who got together and decided which books that were in existence at that time were going to be included in what they called the canonical Bible. They had the Old Testament books already pretty much put together at that time, but which books were they going to now include in what they call the New Testament, the testament that reflects the life of Jesus Christ and the apostles who came afterward? And we do know historically now that many books were not included. There was a book of Enoch that was written. There's a book of Mary Magdalene that was written. There was a book of Thomas. There were other writings that we now know from the Nag Hammadi texts in Egypt and the writings of the Essenes that were left out of the Bible. For what reason we don't know. We weren't there for those deliberations, but it certainly has also come to my awareness in the teachings when you look at the Bible that there were angels who rebelled in heaven at one point, and were cast out of heaven because Archangel Michael had to engage in battle with them. We know that Lucifer was the first of these archangels to decide that he was too proud to serve in a capacity of an angel and serve the children of God, the creations of God that God had sent forth into planet Earth and other physical planes. And so he rebelled and thought, I'm way too mighty. I have way too much knowledge. I don't need to do this. I don't need to serve these younger evolutions who do not have the knowledge and the awareness and the advancement that I have. And so that he tried to place himself above God. And of course, as we know, that doesn't work ultimately. And so there was a battle in heaven, as recorded in the book of Genesis. And Lucifer and many, many other angels who were part of his bands were cast out of heaven. And they were cast in vibration to lower vibrations of existence. And one of those places was here on Earth. The physical universe vibrates at a much lower level than do the higher realms, what we call the etheric realms, the heavenly realms. They vibrate on 33 different levels at a higher vibration. And then we have 33 levels of vibration, which are referred to as the astral realm, which people call hell. But there is hell on earth as well, and there's heaven on earth as well, depending on which level of vibration we choose to engage in during our lifetimes. So that really awakened me to the understanding of evil on earth, because as a child of God, those of us who are loving and kind and want to do good for our neighbors and for our family and for our countries, we can't even I couldn't conceive of real evil. I mean, you read it in history, you read of horrific things that have been done throughout history, and I could never grasp how anyone honestly could be evil, and how they could let evil engage in evil acts towards their fellow human beings. I still to this day really can't grasp it, but it exists and I can't wish it away. And having this understanding of the fallen angels rebelling against God, and then some of them embodying here on earth, really helped me to understand the the origins of this evil and the cause and core of this evil that exists on earth. And unfortunately, these fallen angels they're very, very clever. They're very highly advanced beings, and many of them have taken over governments, taken over churches, taken over schools, taken over economic forums, taken over handling the um, monetary systems of many countries. So many of them are, and many of them have engaged in the music industry. Many of them have engaged in movies. Many of them have set themselves up as idols, and so they want to be idolized. They want to be thought highly of, and so many of them are engaged in things that are not of God and do not lead us to God. And so, having that understanding of these fallen angels here amongst us really helped me to gain a perspective that has allowed me to bypass and move on from being attached to energies that maybe aren't godly energies and actions that don't lead me back to my spiritual core and my spiritual connection to God, because I really understand that I fortunately I've had a couple of spiritual experiences in my life from an early age that gave me a true awareness that there is something beyond the physical senses. There is something beyond my outer awareness and my outer senses that does exist, that really occurs. And the first of those experiences happened when I was 4 years old. It was a nice, I think it was like a spring morning, and I was outside in the backyard with my mother, and she was hanging our laundry on the clothesline. And back then we didn't have a dryer. We just hung our laundry outside to dry. And so she was out there hanging it, and it was a beautiful, I remember birds singing, and it was springtime. There were some flowers on the lawn, and I was out there, and all of a sudden I had this vision in front of me. It was my grandfather. And I'm 4 years old, and I can still to this day kind of have an inner vision of what I saw. And I saw him standing right in front of me. And so I just excitedly said, "Hello, Grandpa." And so my mother turns around and she said, "What did you say?" And I said, "Oh, I just said hello to Grandpa." She said, "Well, why did you say that? He's not here." And of course, at that point, the vision had ceased occurring. I said, "Well, he was here. He was right here." And so I said hello to him. So thankfully, my mother took that to heart. And we were living in Colorado. And my grandfather at that point was in New Mexico. So he was not nearby. It was about 5 hours away driving time. And at that time, he worked on a small cattle ranch. He had to go to New Mexico to continue making a living. And he had been laid off from his job at a railroad at that time, and was still of a working age and needed to continue to produce income for my grandmother and himself. He always helped support the extended family to the extent that he could. And so he was in New Mexico all alone. He lived 35 miles from the nearest little town, and the ranch he lived on had no running water. They got an electric well, but it had no running water. It also had no phone line and no TV line. So there was no way to call him and say, "Hey, Grandpa, how are you doing?" So my mother called my grandmother and said, "Have you heard from Dad lately?" And sometimes when he would go into the neighboring town, 35 miles away once a week, he would call home and touch base with my grandmother. She was there in Colorado as well, and or he would visit with, we had some extended family members, some extended cousins who lived in that little town, and he would sometimes see them and go into the local store and get food supplies and such. So my grandmother called one of our relatives there and asked if they had seen my grandfather. Well, as it turns out, he had not been to the town. Nobody there at that little town had seen him for several weeks, which was unusual. Typically he would go once a week, and so they became very worried about him. And so my grandmother, with two of her other daughters, decided to drive to New Mexico, which was about 5 hours from where we were living, to the ranch in New Mexico. And they got there and they found him very gravely ill. And had he probably, in their estimation, he would have passed away. He would have died had they not been able to take him to a nearby hospital. And I don't remember, I don't recall what he was ill from, but he was very ill. And so he was nursed back to health. And I think they brought him back to Colorado, and he was there for a period of time. So that experience really taught me that there's more out there. Apparently, as an innocent child, just having innocent perception, he, he was able, or his soul was able to come and appear to me, or maybe an angel on his behalf, because he was very devout and he prayed continually and read the Bible continually. So maybe it was an angel on his behalf who appeared before me to give me this message that he needed help. And thankfully, my mother listened, and my grandmother listened, and family listened, and they were able to bring him back to health. And he ended up living another at least 30 plus years after that. He died at the age of 96. And I would say at that point he was maybe 60. Let's see, I was 4 years old, 66. So um, I think he was at that point about 68. Oh no, not even that old. But anyway, he was in his 60s. And so, he led a long life afterward because of that, I think because of that experience. And then I had one other kind of similar experience in terms of a deep spiritual experience. And that occurred to me at age 20. And I was living in Denver where I was going to college. And I had family that were living also in Denver, an aunt and an uncle and some cousins. And one of my cousins was 19 years old. He was only actually 3 months younger than me, but he wasn't quite 20 yet. And he had always been a bit of a daredevil. He liked to push the limits on things, and he was just always seeking a thrill. And unfortunately, and unbeknownst to anyone in the family, he and his girlfriend had they were together, and he was playing Russian roulette with a loaded revolver, and he had that revolver pointed at his head in this one instance and pulled the trigger, and a bullet emerged. And so he was taken to a local hospital, and that happened earlier in the day. And that night, when I returned home from work, I was given a message that my cousin had been in a shooting accident. That's all. And that if he did not make it, that my mother and family would be coming to Denver, which was about 3 hours from where they lived, to attend the funeral. And I was just in shock to read this message. At that point, it was too late to call my mother and find out more details. And so I just went to my room and sat there and just was in complete shock, because nothing like that had ever happened to anyone in our family. We had thank God, a fairly peaceful upbringing, and and it was kind of a trauma to to realize. And of course, I knew nothing more that there had been a shooting accident. That was a term that was left for the message for me. So I didn't know it was self-inflicted. So I was sitting there in my room. It was August. The house I lived in at the time had no air conditioning. And so I had my window open in my bedroom. And all of a sudden, the curtains started fluttering. And it was more than just a wind. There was this tremendous energy that I felt entering into my bedroom. It was this tremendous um, of overpowering emotion, all these emotions I felt I felt emotions of frustration, of anxiety, of fear, of just this ball of emotions came into the room. And I instantly knew in my heart that it was my cousin and that he was there with me. And I just instinctively started sending him love from my heart. And I started saying, it's going to be okay. We love you, and I instinctively started I didn't speak out loud, but I just started sending these thoughts from my heart. And after a period of time, the energy his energy, his emotional energies calmed, and I felt a real sense of peace. And then again, the curtains all of a sudden fluttered at the window, and he was gone. And at that point, I knew, oh, he's moved on. He's dead, and he's moved on. But I was so grateful to that he came to visit me, and that I felt I was able to bring him some sort of peace and calm him in that moment. And so the next day when I woke up, I received a call from one of my other family members who told me which hospital they still had his body on life support at that point. And so I went to that hospital and met his parents, my aunt and uncle, and they were just in total shock. But they had just made the decision when I arrived at the hospital to take his body off of life support because there were no brain waves. And it was evident that he was not going to recuperate from this wound. And so that visitation from the night before really imprinted on me. And I don't think I shared it readily at that moment because I didn't know how to relate to it. And I didn't really know how to share that with my aunt and uncle, for instance, without them thinking I was a little, off my rocker or something. But I kept it personal for many years, and it wasn't until years later that I finally, I think, started sharing it with a few select people when I started engaging on a spiritual path, because I started realizing, well, our soul does go on. Our soul does leave our body when we at the moment of death, and we can sometimes contact the living, or the soul. Our souls from the departed can contact us if we have a soul connection, or we have a heart connection with them. And so I think I look back and I think that experience really helped me to heighten my awareness, I should say, of the spiritual realm, and of the fact that souls do have a continuity and they do continue. And that was very heartening to. So at a certain time, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was really on a spiritual quest. I was seeking truth. I was seeking purpose. I was seeking an understanding of what I was meant to be doing here on earth. And I had the opportunity to be exposed to some teachings. My mother back in Colorado had found some books on the teachings of the Ascended Masters, having first found books about the I Am movement and the discourses that had been given by Saint Germain, a cosmic being named Saint Germain, to people who were the messengers who founded the I Am movement in the 1930s and 1940s. And she came into contact with those books, as I said, being a voracious reader. And through those books, she found teachings on the Ascended Masters that we currently that I've been studying for the last 37 years now. And so she had shared those teachings with me when I went to visit, but it hadn't really sparked an interest in me at that moment. She later shared them with another family member, and later found when I went back for a visit at Christmas, I was exposed to some teachings on the science of sound and music, the science of rhythm, sound, and music. And it was for me, that was the pivotal teaching, because I really lived my life at that point very connected to the music scene. I was in dance clubs 3 or 4 nights a week. Just I've always loved dance, and I loved dancing, moving my body to music. And it was exhilarating and exciting and energizing. Or at least I thought it was energizing at that time. And after hearing these teachings that were given by Elizabeth Clare Prophet on the science of sound and rhythm, I came to understand the power of sound and the power of rhythm. That really, if you look at our creation, the book of Genesis says, God said, "Let there be light," and that was the basis of our creation. It specifically says God said. It didn't say he waved his wand, or he opened his outstretched his arms. He said, "Let there be light." So that there was something to that. He actually used sound, vibration to start the creation of the universe. And that basic core teaching was revolutionary for me in that moment. And also, this teaching goes on to talk about rhythm and drum beats and sound and how it has come down to us from ancient times to the current music that we listen to on the radio and through albums and um, through the internet, through our cars. But sound coming through music has such a tremendous impact on us physically, emotionally, and even on our physical bodies. And I had no idea of that. I had no concept of that until I heard this teaching. And so that teaching sparked a moment where I realized that my engagement at that time was really kind of detrimental because of the type of syncopated beat that was prominent in the music that I danced to, the music that I listened to, the music that I craved. I actually craved listening to it and had it as a part of my daily life at that point. And people sometimes talk about having an awareness or an awakening in the twinkling of an eye. Well, that's how I would describe that moment when I had that inner understanding of, there's two types of music here. There's two types of rhythm, two types of beats. There are types of rhythms that drive our energy down to our base chakra, down, drive our Kundalini power and energy down and have it expelled out of our body suddenly. And that's what creates this amazing thrill and this amazing sense of, oh, I need to move my body to this music in a sensual way, in a sexual way, in a pervasive manner, as opposed to the type of music that causes our energy and to lift, to rise from our base chakra. Our Kundalini rises up to the crown chakra, up to our heart. And it causes that type of energy creates a sense of enlightenment and a sense of connectivity with God. So I didn't know that there were two paths and two types of sound and two types of rhythm until that moment. And it truly, in the twinkling of an eye, I knew I had to just let go of my former engagement and my former desire to experience music that I disco beat and that type of thing that I was always out dancing to, and the current rock music and the current pop music that I was very, very much a part of at that time in that scene, particularly living in Los Angeles at that point. It was very prominent, and I realized truly in the twinkling of an eye, there was no question. I just knew it was over, and it was something that I no longer craved. It was something I no longer desired. And I just had that higher understanding that there are beautiful types of music. There are waltzes. There are beautiful types of other upbeats that are natural that do not have a syncopated beat to them or do not rely upon a syncopated beat, and that coincide with the beats of our heart. Our heart has a beat. We call it the heartbeat. Our organs have their own vibration and beats, and I had never had that understanding previous to this teaching. So it really was an eye opener. And it truly, Pamela, from that moment forward, I just went head first into these teachings that we call the teachings of the Ascended Masters, as espoused by Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Mark Prophet, through this organization called the Summit Lighthouse, because I just saw such tremendous truth and such tremendous opportunity, and I've had such tremendous joy in these 37 years uncovering the connections that really exist between the core teachings of the ancient religions that have come down to us through Hinduism, have come down through Buddhism, who've come down through Christianity, who've come down through Judaism, who've come down through Zoroastrianism. Even the core teachings of Archangel Gabriel is given to the Prophet Muhammad. The initial teachings were very holy and pure teachings. Unfortunately, as we now know, that he took up the sword because he rebelled. The Prophet Muhammad then came up with other teachings that were not inspired by the Archangel Gabriel. So that's why there's two aspects to that teaching. There's the warring side and there's the spiritual side. And so we have that understanding. So we know there are parts of it that are pure and holy and inspired, and parts of it that are not, that are ego inspired and that are not meant to be. We were never meant to pick up the sword and kill our enemies just for the sake of converting them to our belief system. So, but we would look at these core teachings of each of these religions, and really there is a connection. There is a core in each of the real teachings that came down. Now, some of them have been perverted through dogma, through misunderstanding, as we know, even through Christianity. Sometimes things been gotten wrong, or they've gone off in veered in other directions. But if you look at the basic core teachings, love one another as you love yourself, the basic Ten Commandments, they pretty much exist in most of the major world religions. And if you go back to those core teachings, there is a commonality and there is a beautiful thread of truth that interweaves and was given at a particular period of time to a particular group of people in a particular civilization to guide them and uplift them at that moment. They got the keys that they needed for that period of time, and they received those opportunities to advance and to grow and to unite. Unite as a civilization, unite as a community of brotherhood upon earth. And we still are called in this day to unite. We do not wish to fall prey to the divide and conquer tactics of the fallen angels. And that is one of their biggest ploys, is to divide us and conquer us. And we know that that is the art of war. As published in Sun Tzu, the Chinese manual on the art of war is to divide and conquer. And so we don't want to be divided from our fellow brethren of people who are of light, who are of love here on earth, just because of misunderstandings over dogmas of religion. And having that understanding was so joyful for me to realize we could unite. We don't have to get caught up in dogma. We can unite heart to heart, person to person, teaching to teaching. And the Ascended Masters come to enable us to bring us to higher perspectives because until I came into contact with these teachings of the Ascended Masters, I did not know that our goal in life is to ascend. We actually are called to the spiral of ascension the same way that Jesus demonstrated and the same way that Mother Mary demonstrated. Of course, the Catholic Church decided that Mother Mary her ascension had to be called an assumption because they didn't believe at that time that she could be following the same spiral of ascension that Jesus demonstrated. But we now know many other saints since then have ascended. Elijah in the Bible ascended, the prophet Elijah. There are, of course, others who have where it's been recorded in different religions where people have ascended, attained enlightenment, as sometimes they say in Buddhism, Gautama Buddha attained enlightenment. Well, he ascended, and there's different chakras. There's different energy centers in our body, and we can ascend through our heart, as demonstrated by the path of Jesus Christ, or we can ascend through our crown chakra through wisdom, as demonstrated by our beloved Gautama Buddha. So just to see that commonality and that connection to me is exciting and energizing and engaging. I'm so grateful to have these higher understandings, and the things I'm speaking of are just little touch points, little key points. There's so much. Every time I delve into any of these teachings, I just am engrossed. They're so deep. I understand now that you can read some of these things 30 or 40 times and gain a new level of appreciation and a new level of understanding of these teachings based upon the level of consciousness that you bring to the teaching initially. Where are you at in your spiral of your consciousness, and that enables you to then receive even greater truths. And of course, the same thing can be said of the Bible or any of the ancient beautiful religious writings, the Vedas, for instance, and Buddhist texts, and you can go back to them based on your level of consciousness and read them and gain new perspective and new understanding. And of course, we understand the Holy Spirit is very vital and very instrumental in bringing us to those higher levels of understanding. And as part of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, that Holy Spirit is what enabled the prophets after Jesus ascended to spread the teachings of Jesus at that time and to be very prolific in creating this new Christianity, bringing about this revolution in higher consciousness, which we now continue on. And of course, we understand that Jesus came as the master of the Piscean age, and he truly did bear the weight of karma, of world karma, by taking it upon himself and allowing himself to go through the crucifixion, which was a horrific event, as we know. I mean, just truly horrific. But he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, if it be your will that this cup pass from me. Nobody would want to go through such a horrific death and a horrific amount of suffering. But he chose it. He chose to go along with God's will for the demonstration, ultimately, of the resurrection. And that was the key core teaching that sometimes is missed in Christianity, is that Jesus not only died to bear the karma of the world for this Piscean age that was now behind us because we are now in the Aquarian age. But he also died in order so that he could demonstrate the resurrection. And that resurrection is an opportunity for each of us in our path to attain to in terms of the resurrecting of our lower energies up to the spiral of the ascension where we reunite, where we individually have that reuniting with God. And that is a real for me, it is a real goal that is missed in any other teaching I've ever come across, is that is a true purpose of life in terms of, yes, we have to fulfill our dharma. We each have a wonderful gift to give back to life. We have wonderful skills, and some for some of us in some lifetimes, our dharma is to be a parent and to raise these wonderful children and give them a basis for moving on in their own spiritual ascension and spiritual spiral. In some embodiments, is to be a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or a statesman or even a banker or a lawyer. We never know. We have ascended masters, lady ascended masters who have been lawyers and have been very instrumental in those embodiments with helping the people that were in their lives at that time. So there are many, many callings and dharmas that we are called to fulfill at different times. But we know that we have a dharma, we have a purpose. And once we can gain the tools to fulfill that purpose, then we do eventually balance the negative karma that we have accrued. And of course, karma just means cause and effect. As Jesus spoke of karma in the Bible, he said, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." So as ye sow, so shall ye reap. That is the law of karma. And as I've gained a deeper understanding of how to balance karma, the Bible sometimes says an eye for an eye. Well, really, what they're saying in that moment is what we take from life by force. If anything we take from life, we are meant to give back to life. That's how you balance karma. So if we take something that isn't ours, if we take something by force that God isn't intending for us to have, then in order to balance that karma, we have to give that back to life. For instance, I know this could be a controversial discussion if people talk about abortion, but for instance, if somebody aborts a child and has ended that life and that life opportunity for that soul that was in that baby, then the way that they can make up and balance that karma is for them to then give birth to that soul, give birth to life. And it may not be in that embodiment. They may do it in a later embodiment because they now have incurred a karma that they need to now repay. And so it's to me joyful to know that we can repay because we all make mistakes and we all fall short, as Saint Paul has said, that which I wish to do, I don't do, and that which I do not wish to do, I sometimes do. I mean, and those are paraphrased words, but we all fall sometimes into those situations where we engage in behavior or engage in thoughts or actions that are not godly, that are not taking, not beautiful, not uplifting, not kind, not loving. And so in order to rebalance that, we have to look, okay, what can I give back to life? I just took some of God's precious time right here and engaged in this activity that maybe wasn't uplifting or helpful or kind or loving. How can I now reverse that? And we have now a teaching on something called the violet flame. And the violet flame is a spectrum of light. It's the highest vibrating spectrum of light. As we look at the rainbow of colors, the color of violet is scientifically, it's been studied as being the highest vibrating spectrum of light. And so we have been taught that the violet flame, and when you give forth a prayer, a spoken prayer particularly, is more powerful, as we now know the science of sound. If you want to create, and you want to create more deliberately, as Jesus did when he said, "Peace, be still," when he stilled the storm over the Sea of Galilee, or he wanted to raise the dead, as he did with Lazarus, he said, "Lazarus, come forth." It was a fiat. It was a spoken word. It was a spoken command. So if we can, God has empowered us to call in his name, in the name of God, I am that I am. And that was revealed through to Moses in the Bible, the name of God, I am that I am, Yad He Vad He. And so that revelation of the name of God, when we speak it, we empower God's action in us to create what comes after it. So if we say in the name, I am that I am, I call forth world peace, I call forth the peace of America. I call for the peace of Europe. I call for the peace of Australia, of South America, Central America. I call for the peace of the governments of China, of India, of we can just make these wonderful fiats and call the angels into action to bring about this action that we're praying for in the name of God. And of course, we always want to end as Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane with his prayer, nevertheless, Father, not my will, but thine be done. And I think if prayers across this world were spoken with that ending, nevertheless, Father, let not my will but thine be done. Imagine the immense boost we would receive through our prayers because we would be asking God to readjust what we think we're praying for, what we think we want, or what we think we should call forth. And we're asking it nonetheless to be adjusted to his will so that that energy can then be taken by the angels and out and brought into physical manifestation, but in alignment with God's will, not our own will. And I have thought sometimes about starting a movement saying, not my will, but thine be done. If we just focused on that, Father, not my will, but thine be done, each and every day of our lives, when we get up in the morning, when we go to bed at night, talk about just aligning with that which is good, that which is loving, that which is holy, that which is empowering, not my will, but thine be done, O God. That would just be so could it just go so far for all of our civilization to come together in that light and in that vein and talk about peace on earth. Earth, if every world leader said, nevertheless, Father, not my will, but thine be done. Imagine they took their will out of these equations and they really did try to exercise God's will for the people that they rule over, for the people that they govern. Imagine if they did that in corporations these days, so that they were doing the highest good in running the businesses instead of just making the highest profit that they can for their shareholders. Imagine if they had a higher calling. That higher calling was really to provide a true and good service for the planet, for each country, for their constituents. That would that would give them more profits that they could ever imagine because they would be in alignment then with the true flow of the universe, which comes to us from our Father, Mother God, our I am that I am presence. And that beautiful presence is our connectivity to God. So when we call on that that I am presence, we are allowing ourselves to connect with our higher connection, our higher self, our higher good. And we are empowering the words that follow with the energy of God for creation. And that is, we are called to be co-creators with God here on earth. We are called to take dominion over the earth and to take loving dominion, kind dominion, considerate dominion. We don't want to hurt our earth. We call it Mother Earth for a reason because the earth mothers us in every way. It feeds us, it gives us water, it gives us light, it gives us joy, it gives us flowers, beautiful vistas. I mean, Mother Earth is meant to be honored, just as Jesus actually had teachings on the holiness of women, on the divinity of women as being the divine counterpart to the masculine side of ourselves. We have the masculine and the feminine side of ourselves. And I think in this day and age, we hear so much about people being um, confused, let's say, about gender identities. Well, if they only understood that when we reincarnate, sometimes we do, for whatever reason, reincarnate as a male or as a female. We sometimes go back and forth between reincarnations depending upon the lessons that we need to learn and the things that we need to accomplish in that lifetime. So most of us have been embodied, I would say, as both male and female. And so sometimes we have an inner attachment or an inner remembrance or an inner sense of, oh, well, I'm a male in this embodiment, but I remember being a female. So maybe that's who maybe there's some problem with my current embodiment. No, there isn't. We're in the embodiment we're meant to be in. But that doesn't mean we haven't had other experiences. And if people simply had that simple understanding of reincarnation, it would just make such sense of that conflict that some people feel. And I think it would solve so many things. So I think it's really sad that so many people, and reincarnation is spoken of more frequently in this day and age than it used to be when I was younger. But people don't necessarily have the higher understanding of reincarnation and its purpose, and that it is an opportunity for us to evolve spiritually back to our ascension. And all souls who have come to Earth have evolved. Even if they've come from higher planes, they've come here to help to rescue Earth when we've been in very low planes and very low patterns of history. And they've come to bring back enlightenment, to bring back hope, to reinstigate the threefold flame. That's one of the beautiful teachings I love about the Ascended Masters is that they teach us that we each have a flame in our heart. And that flame is a tripartite flame. It is a threefold flame. And the fleur de lis is the picturing of the threefold flame in our heart. And, and that flame is composed of a flame of love, a flame of wisdom, and a flame of power. And power refers to God's will and it refers to action. And that power plume of our heart is blue in color because blue is the color of those who act, those who hopefully align with God's will. It's the color of policemen. It's the color of people who are in the role of acting, taking actions. And we have the yellow flame, the yellow plume, which is wisdom. And most of us instinctively think of yellow when we think of wisdom. It is just the illuminating flame, the flame that guides us in our actions and aligns us with higher understanding and study and such. And then we have the plume of love, which is pink. And of course, we also intuitively understand that pink is a correlation of love. And the outpicturing of love is the beauty of God, the joy of God, the truth of God. Those are aspects of the love plume. And Jesus, whenever he ascended, and prior to his ascension, actually, because he had been challenged by the devil in the desert after fasting for 40 days. He had met with Satan and passed those tests. And he, through the love and wisdom and power of his heart, had a threefold flame that encompassed his whole entire body. For most of us, our threefold flame is 3/16 of an inch. It's this little tiny 3/16 of an inch. And the reason it is that height is because we used to in times in Old Testament times, very Old Testament times, we used to sometimes have a threefold flame that was much larger and it enabled us to live very long lives. Sometimes the Bible has recorded people live 500 years, 600 years, 700 years, 900 years. Well, they were able to do that because they had a bigger threefold flame. So they had a lot more energy coming into their body, which enabled them to live longer lives. But then with the flood of Noah, that flame was reduced in size because people were misusing. There were too many people that were taking that long lifetime and engaging in things that they shouldn't be doing and incurring negative karma, not only on behalf of their lives, but on behalf of the people around them. And so we were given less opportunity so that we could make we have a shorter period of time in order to be here on earth. Now they say, what is it, 62 years, 72 years is the biblical teaching. And of course, some people live longer than that, and some people live less than that. But we have this threefold flame. But Jesus, in his lifetime, had a fiery threefold flame that encompassed his whole entire body because he had exhibited such tremendous love, wisdom, and power through his ministry, through his life. And so that's how he was able, in this whole lead up to the going to be crucified, that's how he was able, excuse me, to absorb the world condemnation that was hurled at him, the hatred, the lies, the betrayals. That's how he was able to absorb all of that was through that fiery threefold flame. And then he transmuted that, all that energy, and he sent it back out as compassion, as forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Who, after going through what Jesus went through and being nailed physically to a cross, the agony, the pain, could, in their purity of heart and love of the heart, say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Imagine. I just think of that and I imagine. So anytime I'm being criticized unfairly or I'm being, I feel like negative energies are being directed at me, I ask Jesus to place his threefold flame over me, over my threefold flame, and help me to absorb and transmute that energy and send it back out as forgiveness, send it back out as love, just as he demonstrated in allowing himself to be crucified and demonstrated through that whole ordeal. And he is an ultimate example of a master who has walked this earth and has given us a path and an example to follow. And unfortunately, the Bible leaves out what happened between his age of 12 and 29. But we now know from other teachings that have been brought to light by world explorers such as Nicholas and Helena Roerich, Russians from the 1900s. They traveled to the Himalayas and found their teachings in some of the monasteries that Jesus had visited places there and spent years studying the Vedas, studying with the priests there, studying Buddhist texts. And he was actually given a name. They called him Saint Issa, Issa, Saint Issa. And they revealed that to Nicholas and Helena Roerich and later travelers as well. Other people in the 1950s and others have come into contact with those teachings and have validated and verified that Jesus did travel to other places during that period of time in the Bible that is not spoken of. And it's between the ages of 12 and 29. He engaged on a path. And it's really a travesty that our youth these days don't have access to those teachings because when we become a teenager, we're 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, there it just isn't that same example. It's really hard to find an example that a teenager wants to model themselves after these days. And I think that's why we have so much distress amongst our teens, so much rebellion, so much experimentation with things that are not life affirming, is because they have trouble finding role models in society around us, and it's particularly spiritual role models. And if we just had those teachings of Jesus revealed, which we do now have through these teachings, we have the lost years of Jesus, which have been written about because they were revealed by Jesus, and he's told us what he did during those lost, quote unquote, lost years that are not spoken of in the Bible. And he did lead a path of continued growth, of continued education, and continued study and practice so that he could prepare himself to return to Palestine when he was age 29 and begin his mission and his preaching at that time for the 3 years that he did engage in that mission. So we know that uh, he did evolve into that role. It wasn't just it wasn't just a pop-up, a magical event that he was, he never claimed to be the only son of God. He said, I am a son of God. But he never said that you're not a son of God or you're not a daughter of God. He claimed his Christhood, and we are each and every one of us meant to claim that same Christhood. Jesus said in the Bible, greater works than I do shall ye do because I go unto my Father. And I read that and I think, how in the world could I do greater works than Jesus did? How could I calm the storms? How could I raise somebody from the dead? How could I heal people? How could I do all these? How could I do greater than that unless I have access to the tools that he had access to? And Jesus was not prone in my feelings. He wasn't prone to making false statements. He wasn't prone to making things sound rosy. He painted the real picture of what was happening at that time, and he painted a picture for each of us, a pathway for us to follow. And so, in order to do greater works than Jesus did, we have to follow in his footsteps and put on that Christhood. We have to become Pamela the Christ, Stephen the Christ. We have to become, our brother and sister in Christ. And that Christhood is that connection, is that awareness, is that higher level of ability to connect to our I am presence and to connect to one another at the higher spiritual levels that we are meant to in order to create a golden age. And I am so grateful that when I first came into these teachings 37 years ago, that a golden age was talked about as being a possible future for the earth, a golden age, because we know the earth has had past ages, and sometimes they have been golden ages, and sometimes they have devolved. And we are called by beloved Saint Germain, who was embodied as the father of Jesus, Father Joseph. We know that Jesus, but he has called us to bring forth a new golden age in this age of Aquarius that we are now in astrologically. And this age of Aquarius is meant to be an age of freedom, an age of enlightenment, an age of upliftment. And it's also the age of the Divine Mother, the outpicturing of the Divine Mother, an awareness and a connection again to Mother Earth, to each other, to the Divine Feminine that we are each out, that is in each of us. And that we are meant to outpicture through the love of our heart. There is the Divine Father and there's the Divine Mother, and they each have a certain polarity, Alpha and Omega, and they are part of one and the same, part of the whole. And we are meant to reconnect with that divinity. And so we know that this golden age is meant to come upon planet Earth, and America, thank God, is meant to be the harbinger and the leader in bringing about that golden age. And I'm just so encouraged to now hear that term spoken of in public in political circles. They talk about a golden age of America, and of course, that being as that happens, that would lead to a golden age of every other country on earth. They have that. Every country has an opportunity to outpicture the Christ, to outpicture a golden age, to outpicture the higher good, the higher sense of freedom. It's incumbent upon their governments and their leaders and their citizenry to take a stand and to make that happen. And thank God we are calling here in America is to preserve freedom's flame because Earth is actually intended to be freedom's star in our own solar system. Earth is intended to be the flame of freedom, and that's why through the Statue of Liberty we have that depiction of the flame of freedom and that depiction of the torch of freedom, because that freedom is what allows us to really engage freely in our spiritual calling, in our spiritual path, in fulfilling our divine dharma, our divine uh, um, work that we are meant to do here on earth to bring in this golden age. So I just find this whole message so exciting and so exhilarating and uplifting. And I'm just grateful to be able to speak about it today with you. So I know I haven't paused. I haven't given you any chances. Do you have any questions for me, Pamela?
I do, yes. The one right away, you mentioned heaven and hell on earth, and you said depending on which vibration that one carries or has, you experience chaos. So I wanted to know how did we individually create our vibration? How can we create the best vibration if we don't have a good one?
I didn't hear the very last part of that. How can we what?
How can we raise our vibration?
Raise our vibration
Yeah,
if we don't have a good one?
yeah.
Yeah. Heaven and hell do exist here on earth. We know you can walk to certain parts of, slums of a city, and it's almost hell on earth. The conditions that exist there, the conditions that people live in, and yet we can go to parts of the earth like, for me, Hawaii is one of these heavenly places on earth. We can go visit Maui or one of these places, and it just feels like, wow, this is heavenly. So there are different vibrations that do exist here on earth, and the way I feel that we have individual choice. God gave us free will. And that is so important for people to understand that God, by giving us this tremendous gift of free will, we have the opportunity to choose every single day. How are we going to take our life energy and how are we going to use it? How are we going to use our voice? What words are we going to speak? How are we going to use our mind? What thoughts are we going to think? How are we going to use our hands? What actions are we going to take? What are we going to create? Now, of course, we have the choice to miscreate. We have the choice to think ugly thoughts. We have the choice to say ugly words. We have the choice, and that puts us in a lower vibration. And ultimately, that leads us to if that's your daily practice is to think ugly thoughts, to think self-condemning thoughts. That's one thing that I've learned that is so crucial. We cannot engage in self-condemnation because God does not condemn us. We tend to condemn ourselves if we've taken an action that we feel is not godly. All we have to do is ask God for forgiveness, and He's so happy to forgive. It doesn't mean we don't atone. The first step is ask for forgiveness. The second step is atone, meaning make up for it. And so, yes, we don't just ask for forgiveness. We also take an action to atone, but we have that opportunity as long as we have free will. And thank God here in America, we have such wonderful opportunities for the exercise of free will. There are sadly many, many other people in many other countries that, as we know, don't have they cannot exercise their free will even to worship as they see fit, or to live their lives as they see fit, or to have as many children as they see fit, or to marry as they see fit. There's, I mean, many, many examples of other places. But here in America, we have free will is still a cornerstone of the founding father's intentions for the citizenry. And so that exercise of free will allows us to move into a higher vibration on a day-to-day basis. We can wake up and say, thank you, God, for this life. Thank you for this opportunity I have today to act, to love, to be your messenger here on earth in whatever way I am called. Am I going to get up and go to work? And as a nurse today, am I going to show your love through my nursing activities? By the way, I love nurses so much. I mention them because they are just to me one of the godliest vocations here on earth. But of course, there are many, many godly vocations. That's just the one that comes to mind. But I have many families who are nurses. That's why I'm more attuned to that. But we have the opportunity through the exercise of free will to raise our vibration. And we can do that also by mantras, by giving beautiful mantras, by speaking out loud. Prayer is very powerful. Thought prayer, prayer, silent prayer in our hearts, our thoughts, our minds. But we have come to learn that spoken prayer is even on a multiple, many times more powerful. So if we can speak our prayers out loud and we can say, Dear God, let your will be done here on earth in my life, this moment, this hour. Dear God, bring forth your peace, bring forth your love. Let me magnify your love in everything I do, in every thought I have, in every action I take this day. Dear God, in the name I am that I am, let victory descend this day for all people who champion truth, who champion love, who champion light on planet Earth. There are so many things that we can say, calling God's action into God's love into action, that those actions raise us into a much higher vibration because we are aligning our thoughts, our words, our actions with that of God. And so, and of course, we, as I said, we end that with "Nevertheless, Father, not my will, but thine be done," because we want to end our prayers with aligning, making sure we align with God's will. Because I can pray for, hey, God, in the name of my mighty and presence, I call for you to bless me with $1 million of abundance this day, but let it be done according to thy will. And, if it's according to God's will, it'll be done. If it's not yet, if I'm not quite ready to have that $1 million in my bank account today, well, then it'll be done incrementally. But it can be done. And God means for each and every one of us to live an abundant life. And Jesus even said that in his ministry, I have come that ye might have life and that ye might have it more abundantly. And so God wishes for all of us to live an abundant life with abundant health, abundant love, abundant opportunity, abundant resources. Abundance is our birthright as coming from a God that then the souls of the universe. I mean, abundance is God's. And so he means for each and every one of us to have it. But we just need to raise our consciousness and awareness to allow ourselves to have it, to know that we are worthy. We are worthy sons and daughters of God. And this idea of original sin being visited upon us, I think, is misguided. There have been forefathers who have sinned, most certainly. And I think we wouldn't be here on earth, most of us, if we hadn't engaged in some of that sin by following after the direction of the fallen angels, falling into their traps, and also starting to condemn ourselves. Anytime we condemn ourselves, we place ourselves outside of the circle of God's love. So self-condemnation is one of the things that the fallen angels project at us because they don't want us to know that we are worthy sons and daughters of God. And they are worthy to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And we are worthy to do the things that even Mother Teresa did. We're worthy to do the things that Padre Pio did. There are many examples as we look around us of really good people, really loving people, really helpful people that we can now ascribe and follow after if we wish to model that behavior. It's just, and by doing that, we not only raise our own vibration, but we raise the vibration of those around us that we come into contact with. For instance, this podcast that we are recording today, my prayer is that everybody who listens to this podcast has a vibratory increase of the rate of increase, and that it quickens some truth in their heart, some truth in their mind, some truth that causes them to take action and go research and go find out for themselves because God places truths in our hearts. And sometimes we're not ready for those truths. And I've had that happen in my life from time to time where I've heard a truth and it's a little hard to accept, it's a little hard to understand, but I've learned not to reject it outright. What I do is I visualize a shelf and I place that nugget of truth, that nugget of teaching. Maybe I don't recognize it as truth yet, but that nugget of teaching, I place it on a shelf and I say, God, if you really want me to know this, if you really want me to understand this as a truth, show me, please. And every single time, I remember one time it took 10 years for that truth to come to me. But every single time I have asked for God to reveal to me in my heart what the truth is about a situation, he has always done so. The Bible says, "Seek and ye shall know." Knock and what is it? Knock and it shall be answered. Seek. Wait, I'm trying to think of the exact verse. I used to know it. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be answered unto you. Something like that. I'm sorry to misquote the exact verse, but it is a beautiful verse about seeking and finding answers. And any religious teaching out there that tells us not to ask is, I think, misguided. I think God means for us to ask and God means for us to know. And there's no reason that we cannot know the mysteries of the universe that God has prepared and set before us. We have wonderful opportunities through the use of free will to raise our vibration here on earth and to create a really peace amongst our brethren. And to me, peace is one of the highest callings. And Jesus was called the Prince of Peace because he really came not to bring a sword. Many of the people around him at that time, thought he had come to be a warrior, had thought he had come to become the new king of the Jews and to expel the Romans. But that wasn't his purpose. He did not come to bring a sword. He came to bring the sacred word, which is really the true meaning of the word sword. It's sacred word. He brought the sacred word. He re-engaged in truth and brought those sacred teachings. And of course, it really scared and challenged the Pharisees and the Sadducees at that time. They were so beholden to the letter of the law. They weren't living the spirit of the law. And that's what he came to try and re-enliven within them, was the spirit of the law. And he came to really demonstrate. And for those who have had the opportunity to watch the miniseries The Chosen, I think it's beautifully elucidated in that miniseries, the life of Jesus and what his challenges were and how he outpictured that. And it's a free miniseries. It's available to anybody on the internet. It's called The Chosen. It was put out by a group called Angel Studios, and they're now putting out a teaching on the House of David, which is about King David, which is marvelous. I just started recently watching. But for those of you who have not looked into The Chosen, I really highly recommend it because it brings to light the reality of the life of Jesus on a day-to-day basis with his apostles, and it really highlights some of the struggles that they encountered and some of the ways they overcame, and how they and what they faced in their time and the opportunities that were there for them to change what existed. And so we really, each and every one of us, have that opportunity on a day-to-day basis to challenge the misconceptions that are before us and around us through love, but also through God's power. And sometimes you have to do this forcefully, as Jesus demonstrated when he went to the temple and he overturned the money changers' tables. He did that was an act of God's will, God's force, God's power, really God's power, not force, because he was demonstrating God power in that moment and saying, "You shall not defile the house of God with these goings-ons." And I think too many of our churches have allowed the defilement to occur in their houses of worship, and we really need to just keep places holy. And we all understand holiness. We all understand what it's like to be around a newborn baby. We all understand what it's like to be around a holy wedding. There are certain events that we know are holy, and they have a certain vibration and energy, and it causes us to dress up. It causes us to comb our hair. It causes us to present our best side, to put our best foot forward. And anything that does that leads us towards holiness, leads us towards love, leads us towards connectivity with God. And so I hope that answers your question about the
Yes,
vibrational levels here on Earth.
yes, very, very good. Just one last question that I have is you mentioned Jesus held our sins, and I wanted to know if you have anything else. Just you could be brief on it, but because people may think, oh, he's still holding our sins. What do you think about that?
That's an excellent question, Pamela. And Jesus definitely did hold back the sins of the world for a period of time. And the Bible talks about the end times in the book of Revelations. And they are talking about the end of the times of Pisces. I have learned, and I don't know a lot about astrology, I'll admit, but I have learned at least some basic aspects of astrology. And the Earth, every about approximately 2050 years, the Earth changes from one astrological sign to another as it orbits throughout the solar system. And so it was in the age of Pisces, and Jesus came. His ministry was at the beginning of the age of Pisces. And so what he sought to do at that time was to set aside the sins of the world, to take them upon himself for that period of time, for that 2050 years of the age of Pisces, so that mankind could have a tremendous opportunity to advance with the tremendous teachings that he brought forth. Now, we know, looking back, that unfortunately many of those teachings were hidden, were lost. They were attacked by the Romans at the time. They were attacked by a lot of other people. And so they didn't end up being as widely disseminated as Jesus would have liked. Like the Bible says, if everything had been written down that he said and did, the world could not contain the books. So we have a few writings, and they were powerful. The New Testament has beautiful writings by the apostles, but we know there's a lot more that he said and did that did not make it to us. So unfortunately, his hope in setting aside these sins of the world so that we would have a greater opportunity and not have to deal with these sins has elapsed. We came to the end of the age of Pisces, and we have now moved into the age of Aquarius. So what the book of Revelations talks about at the end of times was the time whenever we had a summation of these energies. We had to take on these sins and really take on these negative, misqualified energies once again as a civilization, and to because they weren't set aside forever. They were set aside for a period of time, and Jesus bore those sins for a period of time. But we now, as a community of mankind, have to take those misqualified energies upon ourselves and requalify them. And that's our opportunity in the age of Aquarius. And Jesus hoped that through having 2,000 years of not having to deal with certain of those energies, that we would attain to a point of consciousness, that we would then be ready, more ready collectively to take on those energies of war, those energies of hatred, those energies of misalignment, those energies of miscreation, and balance those energies and manifest peace, compassion, forgiveness, love. And that was his hope and his goal in that mission. And so we are now taking those energies on ourselves collectively. And that's why we see there is quite a bit of turmoil out in the world as we see. There's still war. There's still talks of war. There's still many countries that have not given their citizens the free will to worship God as they see fit. There's a lot of control that is exercised over people, and not necessarily beneficial control. Just very authoritarian control. And so the goal and the hope was that each nation, by the time we got to this point, would have a God-ordained government, a God-directed government, a government that was there for the people, by the people, and that the people themselves would take that responsibility and outpicture good and outpicture love in their daily lives, and really reconnect as a brotherhood of mankind on earth. And so that was the hope and the goal. And regardless of the fact that it has or has not happened, we are now contending with the end result. And we are in a period of time where we have our karma and our energies to take on ourselves, to bear ourselves now. So we want to call to Jesus Christ to help us to rebalance those energies and help us to really outpicture his intentions for our civilization and for our lives. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for that question. It's a very important question.
Oh, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Just lastly, what is there anything else that you would most want the people to know?
I would most want people to know that hope is alive, that God is well, that God is in us, in each and every one of us, that the point of contact with God and your higher self is in your heart. That's a starting point for to go into your heart each and every day or each and every moment where you feel out disconnected or you feel fearful or you feel sad or you feel in any way not aligned with God's love. Go into the heart, take a deep breath, put yourself in a place that is peaceful, that is hopefully a nice environment, that is quiet, where you can truly hear your heartbeat or you hear the inner voice of God. God speaks to us through our heart. And if we are inundating ourselves day after day with sounds, having headsets on or going into places where there's lots of extraneous music or like extraneous sound, we are bombarding our senses and we're not allowing the time and space to listen to God's voice in our heart. And people call it the conscious, that little voice. God speaks to us, but he speaks to us in the silence. He speaks to us when we calm ourselves. And we need to take that time daily to go in and commune with God in our heart. And it's really key to understand that we have the opportunity to form a relationship with God. God is in us. God is part of us. Talk to God just as you would talk to one another, just as I'm talking to you right now. Talk to God as your father, as your mother, as your brother. Talk to God and share with God your concerns, your joys. Um, how can I better be an outpicturing of your love, dear God, on earth? How can I better help my parent, my child, my school, my nation? How can I better, be a vessel of your kindness, of your compassion? How can I forgive those who have wronged me? How can I forgive those who have betrayed me? We all go through various things in our lives, and it's not always easy, but there's opportunity there in each of these things that happen to us. There's an opportunity to forgive, to be compassionate, and first and foremost, forgive yourself. Start with forgiving yourself for anything that you condemn yourself with. Say, I'm sorry for, thinking that I'm ugly today, or thinking that I'm dumb today, or thinking whatever it is the thought is that's negative, forgive yourself. Let yourself start over in that moment with your connection with God, and you will find your own peace, your own sense of love, your own balance, because life is a balance. And so that would be my parting message to each and every one of you. And I thank you for taking the time to listen to me. As you can tell, I can
Oh,
talk on and on and on. I could literally talk about these subjects for days because they're just so engaging and joyful and exciting to me. So thank you.
yes. Thank you. Thank you very,
You're
very much
welcome.
for educating all of us. God bless you.
You're very welcome.